I just returned from spending time in Kentucky and Tennessee with family and friends. We hiked, made s'mores, celebrated birthdays, sang karaoke, went to Dollywood. Anybody been to Dollywood? I'll be honest, I wanted a little more Dolly, but it was still fun. One afternoon, I had the opportunity to reunite with my college roommate. While I was at her house, I noticed a large children's Bible sitting on her coffee table. The stunning pictures caught my eye. How's the theology in that? I asked. Oh, I don't know, she shrugged. That's for you to tell me. Fair enough. So I took the Bible, flipped it to a few pages, and let her know the theology was just meh. Not abysmal, but also not great. Probably not something I would want my children, our children, to read. How can you tell so quickly? She asked. Well, besides just checking a few pronouns, I only had to check out a few stories, I said. The Easter story, Jesus' birth, and interestingly, our gospel story for today, the Canaanite woman. It's one that preachers skip over if they can, because we don't like to deal with stories that don't fit nicely into the theologies we need, or at least the theologies we think we need, those that are ingrained in us by white male Christian heteronormativity. Last week, Jackie preached about how the psalmist invites us to revisit how we envision God. And in this particular story, Matthew invites us to revisit how we envision Jesus, and of course, by extension, how we envision God. The story of the Canaanite woman is found twice in the Bible, once in Mark and here in Matthew. The differences in the stories are important and have something to tell us about how we might interpret this difficult interaction wherein a woman, let's call her W. I think she needs a name, don't you? Yeah. W comes to Jesus with her daughter, begging to heal her. She's ignored and exalted before finally getting healing. But what about the Jesus that loves women, that looks out for the outcast, the marginalized, the oppressed? A reading of this passage that places Jesus into the nicely defined Jesus box, a reading of the passage I was looking for and found in that children's Bible of my friends, tidies up this story. Reads it as a testing of faith. No matter what your need, no matter your circumstance, Jesus may deny you more than once, maybe 3 times. But look how kind this Jesus is. He did that to help, see? To show us how to be faithful. Isn't that so nice? Have you heard a story have you heard this twist on this story? Now, I'm not throwing tenacity and fierce faith, as Jackie might say, out the door this morning. Of course we're called to be faithful, but I am telling you that that single interpretation of the Canaanite woman is problematic. Casting Jesus above reproach, clamping down on our ability to wrestle with ancient text is problematic because it often leads to public policies that are problematic, like worship of the Second Amendment, banning of gender-affirming care, eliminating teaching our country's racist roots. Yes, problematic theologies even allow us to watch Maui and Canada burn and our glaciers melt and not even bat an eye. Problematic theologies, narrow, unchecked understandings of Jesus and God not only wield problematic policies, but systems, souls, and dare we say, churches. We must be accountable to Christian hegemony by constantly reclaiming and reframing Christianity. Yes. Our middle church call, Jackie reminded us of last week. We do this by looking at Scripture with fresh eyes, with intersectional lenses, with liberation as our goal, in community, and wrapped with curiosity. In Matthew's version of this story, W is called a Canaanite. Now that's peculiar, actually, because by this time in Roman history, the Canaanites as a people group no longer existed. In Mark, W is described as Syro-Phoenician, appropriately explaining her hometown and lack of Jewish heritage. The moniker Canaanite was archaic. Matthew is emphasizing that she's a Gentile, not Jewish. From the jump, she's positioned in opposition to Jesus, and we're positioned almost to side with Jesus. I have so many other questions about this story, too. Where was the husband? Dead? Working? Many scholars propose that he was ashamed of his daughter's conditions and decided just to leave her for dead. W, of course, doesn't agree and decides, even though she's not supposed to talk to men, to go alone, advocate for her daughter, and seek healing. When she meets Jesus, the Greek translation tells us she is screaming. She is desperate for Jesus to heal her daughter. Let's go into that place. Imagine you have someone you love so deeply, a daughter or someone you will eventually depend on to take care of you. As the age gap between you and your husband, if he's still living, we know is tremendous. This person is very sick. She's ostracized from society and her own family. She's hurting, desperate. Imagine that trauma living in your body. Empathy for this person that you love, and knowing your own livelihood and well-being depend on her wellness. Have you been there? Full of trauma, full of fear, desperate. Maybe you're there today. Imagine taking all of that, all of yourself, and gathering enough courage and energy to show up to a place of hope and being denied. Not once, but 3 times. I share this with permission. My sister suffers from debilitating COVID long haul. If you or someone you know suffers from long haul, you've heard it all. Is it really COVID? Have you tried this? What about that? Surely you can, but no. No. There are no answers, no one size fits all. The entire world is on a communal journey of figuring out long haul. She's been out of work for 20 months and recently said something I've been sitting with. We hear appropriately increasing calls to rest and to take care of ourselves, to change, to heal, to love ourselves. To this, she said, I wonder if anyone knows that even that takes more energy than I have. We're talking about that kind of body coming to Jesus. And then, called a dog. So no, I won't settle for an interpretation that says Jesus is testing this woman's faith just to pat her on the back and say, good job, you passed. That's insulting. It's not inviting. It's not the kind of relationship I want with the divine. And yet, that kind of Jesus, that above approach Jesus, appeals to those who can't risk having an imperfect teacher, who can't risk shaking up long withheld notions of who Jesus is, who can't risk challenging today's oppressive Christian theologies. What does that say about us? That we would accept that kind of Jesus. At this point in his ministry, Jesus was tired. He left by boat to go be alone, only to be followed by hundreds. He faced growing needy crowds, hostility from religious authorities, and growing distress from the disciples, all at once. By the time W found him, He had distanced himself both physically and emotionally. And Jesus, and his full humanity, was tired. He was in his own kind of way hurting. He wasn't his best self. And in such times, we know what happens, don't we? Hurt people. Hurt people. Now, when we say that hurt people, we are not excusing behavior. We are trying to make sense of it. This story is a reminder of Jesus' humanity. The Gospel of Luke tells us that Jesus grew in wisdom. He didn't always get it right. He didn't start out knowing everything. He was in process, just like us. Most of his interactions with women took place in private or domestic places, at the home of a sick one, at a sister or a cousin's home. Even in his interaction with the Samaritan woman, they were in private. They were off from the crowd. Interestingly, when Mark tells this same story, the interaction is in a home. But in Matthew's text, we're right smack in the public eye. This not-so-fine Jesus moment is not hidden, but exposed. Jesus, heal my daughter, she screams with all the trauma, fear, and hope. Now, as she screams, she is very skillfully addressing Jesus, calling him Lord and Son of David, using language that gives her the best chance of getting what she wants. Anybody been there? These titles are foreign to her. That's not her language, but they reflect the dominant culture. And inasmuch, she validates his sense of power. Anybody had to do that before to anyone? Even so, at the first go, he ignores her. She keeps shouting, "Send her away," the disciples say. He doesn't send her away, but he answers rather piously, "I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel," making clear that she is outside his target mission. Remember, she's not Jewish, she's a Gentile. And at this point in his life, Jesus hadn't come to realize his inclusive ministry to all. But not giving up, W now blocks Jesus with her body, kneeling before him. A move that was powerful, but still very smart, not outrageous enough to merit retaliation. She's still playing by the rules of the social, religious, and cultural order while simultaneously pushing their narrow limitations. "Lord, help me," she screams a third time. Is the daughter there too? I don't think there's anybody at home taking care of the daughter. Is she kneeling, holding a crying baby? How old's the child? Is it hard to hold her? Is she convulsing, wailing, flailing? How many people are standing by watching this spectacle? Jesus responds, "It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." Yes. Giving bread to the dogs, of which he's just called this woman, means there will not be enough for the children. Moreover, his targeted mission, those who are Jewish. But now, W pulls another fast one on him. She responds to his insult from her context. In his context, people don't keep dogs in the house. They're not revered. But in hers, dogs are beloved members of the community. So by saying that dogs even eat the crumbs, she moves the story from one of scarcity to abundance. Jesus, we've got so much food, we have leftovers. And our dogs, who we happen to love, get some too. She resists denial by speaking from her own cultural context, her unique place of identity. And guess what? Her boundary-crossing, script-flipping, brilliant use of culture and context caused Jesus to jump course, to change. There is enough, Jesus, she teaches, even for the other, who is outside even what you think is outside. She challenged his xenophobia and expanded his ministry. From this point on, he began to heal feed, and preach to Gentiles as well as Jews. So nope, I don't think this is a story about Jesus using a lowly woman to prove a point about faithfulness. I think this is a story about how a woman uses Jesus to gain healing for her daughter. Do you see how important just that slight reorientation is? It's not huge. The children's Bible for sure missed it. But a woman changes Jesus' mind. A woman helps us see Jesus' humanity. A woman changes the course of his entire ministry. And not just a woman of a different outside religion, race, culture, and status. That kind of woman changed the world. So what do we do with this Jesus? This male, also influenced by society and the patriarchy and race, and not knowing what always to do with himself, Jesus. Do we get mad at him? Maybe. But can we also afford Jesus the kind of grace that God affords us? The kind of grace we should afford one another? Can we imagine learning something still from this Jesus? Yes, Jesus calls the woman a dog because he can call her a dog. There's no denying or sugarcoating it. It stings. But it's what Jesus does when he's challenged that's also really important. He didn't walk away. He didn't counter again. Took 3 times, but he finally stopped. He didn't walk around her. He didn't send her away when the disciples asked him to. He stayed. He engaged. He created space for dialogue. The kind of dialogue so desperately needed in our world. A kind of dialogue of give and take, of resistance and counter-resistance, of listening, changing, evolving. It's in that space that Jesus changed his mind. This is a story about Jesus sharing power. This is a story about 2 people working across difference of power, gender, culture. It's a story of vulnerability to form something new. Jane E. Hicks talks about this encounter in terms of border crossing. Whenever we meet communities of difference, we are border crossing. Hicks continues, transgressing boundaries to heal bodies challenges the status quo and reworks relations of power. Frederick Joseph recently wrote about what Hicks calls border crossing and the grace owed each other across cultures in a piece about Jamie Foxx and Jennifer Aniston. Anyone see it? Reminding us that Black people aren't often granted the same grace across lines of difference. And he rightly points out for all of us that such skills, this is a quote, such skills or even virtues are in short supply, not because they're finite, but because they are not cultivated, nurtured, or prized, which is largely by design, end quote. So, friends, we need to be reminded that at the other side of our agency to converse across difference is what? Healing. Healing emerges through engagement with difference. What if healing is on the other side for all of us? We can all risk solidarity. We can all dare to believe that something better awaits on the other side of ego, that something better is possible that we can only create together, that we don't always have it right, that we, even with our trauma and our exhaustion, are absurdly powerful. Who are you in this story? Are you sure enough of your agency, of your identity to demand attention? How do we respond when we mess up? How does our understanding of Jesus change after today's reading? How might that apply to social and political issues we face today? What if we believed in ourselves enough, in God enough, in the humanity and imperfect Jesus enough to risk solidarity and difference? To believe that we aren't pawns in a power demonstration, but co-creators of freedom, justice, and love. Friends, we know that there are those Bibles all around us, aren't they? And they all have pretty pictures. This one really did. I was so sad. But let's do ourselves a favor and apply hermeneutics of curiosity to the stories we read and tell about Jesus and God. The world needs us to do that. Let's be vulnerable and curious and graceful together. Healing is on the other side. Amen.